It continues to engage in the public through focused community meetings, pop-up events, online surveys, and open houses. Since the project's relaunch, MTA has received over 3,700 survey responses, hosted over 50 events, and has engaged in approximately 5,500 people. Feedback has included vocal support for light rail and mixed input for tunnel preferences, with questions focusing on property impacts, traffic, parking, and safety. Additionally, reliability, travel times, access, and implementation time were cited as top priorities based on the public responses. MTA is continuing to work with the Federal Transit Administration, reviewing this feedback and data, and is anticipating a recommended mode announcement this spring. I'd like now turn to the Purple Line. Purple Line is a 16-mile critical investment in Maryland's transportation system that will provide reliable east-west travel in the Montgomery and Prince George's counties. It will help reduce congestion, improve our environment, increase transit connectivity, create jobs, and drive economic growth. The project is over 60% complete, and with the help of more than 1,100 workers at 60 active work sites, continues to advance. And we're gearing up for the delivery of the first light rail vehicles to the Glen Ridge Operations and Maintenance Facility later this year. The MTA and concessionaire are actively working to identify and mitigate any potential delays and any associated cost increases with that project, and will continue to provide regular updates to the public, remaining committed to delivering this project for the region. Turning to the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit System, the MTA continues to advance the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Project, a rapid transit system along the 19 miles of Maryland 5 US 301 corridor between Branch Avenue's Metro Rail Station in Prince George's County and the Waldorf White Plains area in Charles County. Maryland received $5 million in congressionally directed spending in 2022 for planning, design, engineering, and environmental review, with the state also putting in $5 million to match for that project. The governor and the General Assembly also added an additional funding, leading to a total of $20 million for this project. The MTA continues to coordinate closely with both Prince George's County and Charles County on a framework agreement, which has been drafted and been executed. Additionally, MTA, county staff, and the Federal Transit Administration recently conducted a kickoff meeting to discuss the approach to meet the federal environmental NEPA process, the National Environmental Protection Act. MTA has also selected a consultant team, and existing conditions and study review work is currently underway. Another major project is the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel is an Amtrak project and is the centerpiece of the B&P Tunnel Replacement Project. The department and the MTA are committed to working closely with Amtrak in partnership toward its completion. Significant improvements will be made as a result of this project, including greatly increasing travel speeds for the Northeast Corridor, a tripling of rail capacity, and notable modernization of the safety systems. As part of last year's framework agreement with Amtrak, the state has committed to $450 million contribution over 9 years. And though Amtrak will be providing the design, construction, installation, and testing, the department and MTA look forward to continuing partnership of the remaining course of the project over those 9 years. In September, Amtrak achieved a significant milestone when they announced the first of 3 major construction contractors for this project. MTA is also currently reviewing design of the new West Baltimore MARC station with prioritizing accessibility and connectivity to the surrounding communities. Lastly, Amtrak and MTA are continuing the preparation of a definitive agreement for the project, and a draft agreement is currently with MTA for review and expected to be returned to Amtrak in mid-February. Zero emission bus transition is another major effort that we have underway. It's the final one for MTA. I wanted to highlight their what they've done today. MTA has contracted for its first 7 zero emission buses in 22, and they arrived in 23. The 7 battery electric buses completed road testing, and we anticipate to begin revenue service very shortly. Additionally, electric vehicles supply equipment and power upgrades were completed at the MTA's Kirk Bus Division, and the Eastern Bus redevelopment contract was awarded to bring that up to speed as well. MTA is also planning to seek Board of Public Works approval for all battery electric bus contract for up to 350 buses to be delivered between 2025 and 2030. and separately for the award of a design, build, operate, maintain contract for electric vehicle supply equipment and charge maintenance services to support the fleet. To address the workforce needs that come along with this transition to the electrification of the fleet, MTA has created a draft zero-emission bus workforce development plan to provide a roadmap for implementing training for our current employees, workforce, and as well as create apprenticeship programs for the future. Turning to a major highway project, American Legion Bridge. Under the Moore-Miller administration, there is a renewed vision for this project that includes transit and ride sharing, TOD, transit-oriented development, and creating bicycle and pedestrian connections. Replacing the American Legion Bridge is still a key component as it is critical to the safety, critical system preservation need. We'll also be conducting phased approach to manage lanes based largely on stakeholder feedback. State Highway will also study I-270 north of the ICC to evaluate multimodal needs. Activities will begin in early 24, including public engagement and a needs analysis. MDOT continues to explore funding opportunities, including discretionary grant opportunities with the federal government and other public funding options. We are committed to this new vision by ensuring transparent and accessible opportunities for the impacted communities and stakeholders to engage in the program development process for the American Legion Bridge. Vision Zero is another major effort. Sorry. Skipped one page. Let me go back to State Highway. State Highway D&E program. I also wanted to highlight some of the major projects in the State Highways Development and Evaluation Program, many of which you are familiar with. Here's just a listing of a number of those projects in that program. The construction program always gets a lot of attention, obviously, when we build things, but without the D&E program, the Development Evaluation Program, there wouldn't be any projects to construct, and we would not know the schedule and cost for those. State Highway continues to move forward with the development of major projects in the capital program. This list just reflects a few of those across the state. While construction funding for several of these projects was deferred outside our program years in the CTP, in the capital program, published last week, MDOT is committed to making sure these projects and many others continue through the necessary project development phases. I'm sorry, now turning to Vision Zero. Safety is clearly a #1 priority for the department and for the state. As every mode promotes the state's Vision Zero principles. In short, crashes are preventable and zero is the only acceptable number of motor vehicle fatalities. In order to meet the state's established goals, the MVA's 2021-25 Strategic Highway Safety Plan focuses on 6 emphasis areas determined to be the major causes of motor vehicle crashes, including distracted drivers, impaired driving, as well as the 4 E's of highway safety, engineering, education, enforcement, and emergency medical services. The MVA's Highway Safety Office is also encouraging all counties to establish their own local highway safety plans, a critical component of the state's comprehensive approach to safety, and a requirement of the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant opportunities for local governments. A number of local governments have pursued those grants, and we help them to pursue them. At State Highway Administration, the team is focused on implementing specific engineering and infrastructure strategies to reduce fatalities and injuries on our roads. This includes a pedestrian safety action plan launched in May of 2023. The plan identified numerous corridors across the state with the greatest pedestrian safety needs. We have currently programmed nearly $100 million to move the design efforts forward on 5 key corridors identified in the plan. The 5 are Maryland 410 in Prince George's County, Maryland 650 in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, US 1 in Howard County, Maryland 150 in Baltimore County, and Maryland 2 in Anne Arundel County. Finally, for our one other project is the Howard Street Tunnel. The Howard Street Tunnel project is critically important to the long-term success of the Port of Baltimore. Once complete, the project will create double-stack railroad corridor to and from the Port of Baltimore and allow the port to track as many as 160,000 additional containers annually. The project consists of a vertical clearance improvements at 22 locations on the CSX rail network between Baltimore and Philadelphia. The Maryland Port Administration is working with CSX to advance the project. CSX is responsible for designing and constructing the project, but we are responsible for reimbursing CSX with state and federal funding as the work is completed and invoices are submitted. Since the project is spread across 3 states and the scope of the work varies between sites, CSX has decided to group the project into 10 packages for design and construction. As of January 2024, construction of 3 of the 10 packages is complete. There are 3 packages that are currently under construction, one of which is in Maryland. The remaining 4 packages, all in Maryland, will go to construction in 24, and construction is anticipated to wrap up on a rolling basis between now and spring of 2027. One final project is the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. The final project, there's a lot obviously happening at the facility, and while we receive a lot of questions about the Bay Crossing study, I did want to mention a few other projects that the toll authority is doing as well before I turn it to the Bay Bridge. MDTA is in phase 1 of the eastbound deck replacement project, which includes critical system preservation activities to maintain safe and working order conditions on the eastbound span. The toll authority has designed the project to ensure minimal traffic impacts for residents, motorists to avoid 24/7 lane closures. The toll authority also undertook automated lane closure system project, which transitioned and the manual lane opening and closing system on the bridge to a fully remote system. Finally, the MDTA is also focusing on the Bay Crossing Tier 2 NEPA study, which includes analysis of alternatives from the Tier 1 study. The alternatives will include a no-build alternative and a range of building alternatives involving various alignments, crossing types, and a modal and operational alternatives, including pedestrian, transit, and bicycle access. MDTA has remained engaged with the public throughout this process and anticipates presenting the results of the initial alternatives analysis at the next series of public open houses, which is anticipated this fall. Thank you again for inviting MDOT to present on these large projects. I know we went pretty quick, but I just wanted to try to get as many out there as I could and be glad to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, to you and your team. I see the board's lighting up. We'll start with Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary and members of the Department of Transportation for being here. And I know this is a difficult time for you, but I'm glad to see that you are moving forward on a number of these projects. I would like to ask a question about the American Legion Bridge project. Let me also state that just at the outset that I think the public hearings that you held weren't really hearings. They were unusual. They were sort of, listening sessions, I would call them. I thought those were very good and very effective. And I know the people in my district appreciated being able to participate in that. But I did see, you talked about the American Legion Bridge and the I-270 north of the ICC study. Are those two connected together? Like, is the American Legion Bridge project going to go forward? I understand that they're connected, but is the American Legion Bridge slated to go forward with that project, or is it contingent upon completion of the I-270 study?
No, the American Legion project is going to go forward, but also we need to focus on the northern portion of I-270 as well.
Right. And thank you for that clarification. And I'm glad to hear that you're focusing on the northern portion, because that's really where the bottleneck is. And heretofore, we were looking at the southern portion, which has its own challenges, but the northern portion is really where the bottleneck is. So thank you for that. And, we're happy to assist you in District 15 in any way we can to get to a conclusion on, what we do with that corridor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Foley. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, Administrator, and everybody who's here. Really appreciate your being here and all of your work. And I wanted to ask, first of all, about the red line. And I really appreciate the work that you've done to bring this back. I know you've really accelerated going through all the important steps, and you're working with the FTA. And I see that you have the mode announcement anticipated in spring 2024. I just want to ask, what next after that? Is there a plan, especially given the funding challenges, for how we get from here to actually constructing it?
Sure. I'll start, and Holly Minister can jump in as well. But basically what comes next is the locally preferred alternative. right? Because then becomes the alignment issue that we'll have to deal with. And then we get into going after the federal dollars. So you have to get, there's a long process, roughly 2-year process of that, where we will compete nationally for dollars. And that will drive some of our decisions of how we go forward with the project as well. So that's plays out over roughly the next 2 years, where that'll come into much greater focus. We cannot assume a particular mode or alignment right now for any costing issues right now, but clearly that will be something that will develop in the next program cycle of the CTP.
Sure, and I appreciate that, but even if we get the federal dollars, state dollars are going to be required as well. And so are you doing, and I understand you don't have the costing information yet, but are you doing or planning to do strategic planning in terms of whether, if we get the federal dollars and if we don't get the federal dollars, how we can go about funding that and moving to the construction?
Yes, I mean, to get the federal dollars, you have to show that you have the state dollars to support it. So we will be creating a plan to do that. And obviously we'll have to work through the revenue side of that to do that. With this larger discussion I think we're going to be having over the next few months.
Great, thank you. And so I understand and really appreciate the one-time restoration of funds that the governor has allocated. Obviously, we need a sustainable long-term plan. I just want to ask in terms of the state of good repair, are we going to be able to fund that going forward?
Yes. That's what we did with the 150. It does it for 25. Again, we have these longer term issues we have to deal with. But again, we need to continue to keep that state of good repair up when we go for the federal dollars for the red line.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Douglas. Just to follow up, I understand you haven't selected the mode and alignment, but clearly there's only a few options left. So what is the range of costs for the red line?
The range is from about 2 billion at the low end for surface bus rapid transit, and at the high end, about 8 billion for light rail and a tunnel.
And best case scenario, what would the federal share of that be?
I think we would ask for a 49% share. That said, at the higher end, that would be one of the largest, I think the largest award in the CIG program ever. And so we do need to look at that and kind of be realistic about what kind of federal share we can get.
So you're looking for between $1 and $4 billion of state money, because that would be the other half, right?
State and local. I mean, when the red line was around before, we had a commitment from Baltimore City and Baltimore County as well.
How much of that is accounted for in the current 6-year CTP?
We have funding currently to keep our planning process going, which is enough, for this year to really accelerate, work through the environmental process. But as the secretary noted, yes, we will need to look at that as part of the larger overall funding.
But none of that chips away at the 1 to 4 billion.
Correct.
So none of that is budgeted in the current CTP?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Long?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and administrators for being here. I want to take you to a different part of the state, Southern Maryland. The Maryland Ford Thomas Johnson Bridge. Just wanted to see a progress report on that. And as well too, I know there's been conversation about it being a privatized toll bridge. And I know that there's a lot of discontentment in Southern Maryland as a whole, referencing it being a toll bridge. And even open it to being perhaps a toll bridge for state revenue, but not to a privatized company. So just wanted to know what the course of action was, timeline, general overview for that.
Okay. I'll hit a few of it, but in terms of the privatization toll issue, we have not been involved with that. I know that there's some contractor there out there talking, but that is not our initiative, nor have we been part of those conversations. In terms of, we are working with potentially going after some additional federal dollars to do some more studies of the bridge there. That's the current status. I don't know if you want to add anything, Will.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the question. For the record, I'm Will Pines, Administrator for State Highway. Related to Thomas Johnson, we had received some funding previously, about $2 million. That all of that money is still retained in the CTP, so that allows us to move forward with some geotechnical studies and for doing analysis related to the navigation below the bridge. As you know, there's a lot of tall ships and things that go through that area, and we need to study how much of that can continue to move in there. The grant opportunities at the federal level, discretionary grants, the Thomas Johnson already has a record of decision from NEPA, so it doesn't qualify for the open bridge investment grants that are out there, because right now the open grant is for planning. We will look ahead in the future to consider it for future grant opportunities, but it does require the match funding. And at this point, that's competing with all of the other match funding. That's the big challenge at this time. In terms of the toll concepts, we on the CTP tour that did come up. We listened to both counties, heard the feedback that, there's not really a lot of interest in privatizing the bridge. And there was concepts thrown around about dedicating the bridge to the county and then privatizing it. At this point, we are not pursuing any of those discussions. We would want to hear a lot more from the county that there was an actual interest in pursuing that before advancing any further.
Understood. And I'm not sure if this would fall under your purview, but I guess in the meantime, given the amount of people that tend to jump from the bridge, just looking at perhaps railings or something of that particular nature while we're on this pathway.
So that did come up at the CTP. We addressed it directly there. We've had a lot of challenges with that statewide. There have been other locations where we've done exactly that. And unfortunately, it really just tends to shift where it occurs. In Western Maryland, we did that and ended up having the same occurrences 2 miles away. So unfortunately, it's not a very effective strategy unless you do it everywhere. And given the funding challenges, we're not in position to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Healy.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Pines. I appreciate that you've been working so hard on all these things, and especially on pedestrian safety. And you and I had a long conversation about some things that might be done. Is there a map of these 5 locations that you're working on? Maryland 410, 650, US 1, all of the ones that the Secretary listed?
We can provide you with one.
You have a map?
Sure.
Okay, that would be great. And the other question is about the MARC stations. I was wondering if you had looked into, because a lot of them have been not used. They're sitting there vacant. Trains don't stop there anymore. I hear from people who used to catch the train in their neighborhood, could walk to it. And I wondered, is there any interest in developing some kind of technology that will allow people to kind of call a train to stop, like make an arrangement, because they don't need it all the time. And I understand you don't want to stop every time when there's nobody there, but if there is an interest in developing some technology where people could use the MARC train and these stations that we've already built so that people could stop and use them.
So I can take that. So we don't own the lines. So I believe we're talking about CSX would own this, and so it would have to be negotiations with CSX.
Okay.
The one other issue that we would run into is that any new station that we build or use, even though this is an existing station, but because it's been decommissioned, to restart it, you would have to make it accessible. Mm-hmm. And because they're not currently ADA accessible, that would create some funding issues there. If there's specific areas where there are stations and people need better access, we're happy to have those discussions and work with you on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Healy. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 2 questions. Take it to Eastern Baltimore County, right? We're moving around the state here. So my first question is, Mr. Secretary, if you could give us an update on what your team is doing with respect to the runway lengthening at Martin State Airport. That is a critical project to my district and frankly, the whole state, with the potential now to lose the A10 warthogs there. Specifically, I'd like to know if there's been any progress. I believe it's Amtrak with getting the ability to lower the catenary there. And then I do also have another question as well about the MARC train.
Yes, in fact, I've recently went out to Martin and met with the National Guard there, went through the issues. We're not their issue, to be frank. We're working on the runway. We're working on the basically bringing the catenary lower, and also we have to clear some of the woods there as well as you know as well to do that lengthening. So that's what we're working on. As you know, they have a larger issue that they're wrestling with the Department of Defense, but we're making sure that we're not in the way of anything that they need to do. It's a very similar approach that we're taking with the FBI headquarters. We're going to do everything that we're ready to do the other things will play out the way they play out, but we're not going to be the stumbling block for maintaining that air service at Martin State Airport.
Sure. I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Chair, one more question, if I may. So my other question is with respect to the MARC train station in Middle River. I believe it's one of the few, I don't want to mischaracterize, but one of the few in the Northeast corridor where passengers walk across the track. Obviously, there are safety concerns with that. Is there any discussion to address that situation, in the long term here?
Yep, absolutely. So you are correct. That is the only one that you do walk across. It is definitely a safety issue. We applied 2 years ago for funding from the federal All Stations Accessibility Program to start the planning process to planning and design for a high level platform and for a grade crossing not at grade. And so we're in the process of working through that now. The plan would be then later to apply for another grant to continue that project and move it forward. So absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Naraki. Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Coming back to the American Legion Bridge, you mentioned the bridge. You also mentioned a study north of the ICC. The section of the bridge to the 270 split is my and the chair's district, and we have very active constituents who are very interested in this project. So can you tell me whether that's a part of what you're looking at, or are you just looking at the bridge and north of the ICC? Don't touch the button. Oh my goodness.
Sorry. Operator error. So yes, to answer your question succinctly, we are addressing the area from essentially the GW Memorial Parkway in Virginia up to the 270 split to deal with the bridge itself. One of the things we heard through the public open house process, we had those 4 meetings. Rockville, that area was sort of just really a non-starter for a lot of folks that, as was mentioned, the 270 through that area is already has HOV, a lot of the amenities there. So we've really truncated the program. I'm asked regularly what's changed with the new administration. That is really a major change, that we've truncated it down to that split because we've got a bridge. It's more than 50 years old. It's coming to the end of its life. We do have to deal with this state of good repair infrastructure issue. We also know that we heard through the public process, there's a lot of interest in having pedestrian bicycle amenities across the river, along with convenient, fast, reliable transit across the river. And so the minimum transit solution that's discussed is some kind of viable opportunity where that's bus rapid transit really as the minimum option. So those two things, the pedestrian, dealing with the maintenance of traffic of the bridge and the transit solution in itself, gets you away from having vehicles in the existing lanes. So you have to widen in some fashion. So that's why we've really targeted the bridge and the area surrounding the bridge in this first core project that we're focused on right now. That's also why the dollar amount of the program has been reduced to align with that truncated section.
A follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the dollar amount, and that was my next question. What is the dollar amount, and how much do you all have budgeted for this?
Don't have that memorized, if you can bear with me a moment. So I know how much we deferred from the original. That was 68.5 million. If you would bear with me a few minutes, I can find the full.
If you can just follow up with that.
Sure. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have it.
It's in the
My
150
apologies.
range, if I recall, but
That's
I don't know the exact number.
Okay, and then how much do you have budgeted right now for this project?
Close to the 150.
Yeah, close to that 150.
Close to the
We'll
150.
get you the exact
let it
number. I
get you the
apologize.
exact
I don't have that at my fingertips.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, it's billions of dollars to construct the project, and of the construction dollars, 0 are budgeted. Is that accurate?
The construction dollars, we submitted in August for that grant application to pursue the construction funding, but it is correct that we have not received that grant in order to fund construction.
So I guess I'll ask you the same question I asked the administrator about the red line. What percentage do you think that would cover if you were to get the best case scenario with federal dollars?
Typically, these discretionary grants, it's an 80-20 split. So in a best case scenario, we would get 80%.
We got to get you that deal, Administrator Arnold. Let me just ask a quick follow-up about the American Legion Bridge before I turn back to my colleagues. Earlier, the Secretary called it a critical system preservation need, and you said, quote, coming to the end of its life. So since that is in my district, could you just tell me more about what you mean by that? And, you know, I know you just replaced an FDR era bridge, so you have a lot of familiarity with this, Mr. Administrator. So can you just talk about the health and structure of the bridge briefly
Sure.
and calm people from those quotes?
So we have a very robust asset management program. We're required by the federal government to do routine inspections of all of our bridge assets on at least a 2-year cycle. Through that program, we've been regularly monitoring the condition of the American Legion Bridge. It is safe, as you noted. If it wasn't safe, it wouldn't be open. But we do project, based on our forecast, that it'll be at the end of its useful life in poor condition within 10 years.
Great, thank you. Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions, if you don't mind. Both are related to development and evaluation programs. Starting with the buoy project on Route 197. What is the schedule of that project, and what portions of it are funded thus far? This is buoy 197.
See if we can pull that up very quickly, just to.
Okay, while you're pondering
Yep.
upon that, while you're looking for it, going to Route 210 now, there was an amendment put forward by this committee a while back whereby the funding for the remote cameras were going towards redesigning of 210. What is the status of that as well? The redesigning of Route 210.
So let me deal with 210. I don't have the funding numbers for 197. I'm
Just
going to have to get back to you. We have a lot of thousands of projects, so
Thank you.
I cannot memorize them.
Okay.
But 210, we are required every year to submit a report to the legislature on 210 and the status of the safety issues surrounding that. That project we do have a number of interim improvements along 210 to deal with certain safety issues, but the the requested concept that would really deal with the entire corridor, we do not have that funded at this time. The using revenues from the camera systems to kind of fund the transportation trust fund, that's not in place today to be able to help accommodate that. And so we do not have a dedicated funding stream to support the project at this time.
I thought we did too. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll look into that. I thought we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes. Chair Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, the Vision Zero program, is that designed to eliminate fatalities of pedestrians or fatalities of auto accidents in general?
All the above,
Okay.
pedestrian, bicyclists, and obviously cars.
And we know that we've had an increase in the number of severe auto accidents in the last couple of years since the pandemic slowdown. I know that because I'm in the insurance business. We've had many more claims. But when we talk about the goals of the Vision Zero program, I'm paying attention to some of the projects that have been delayed in the governor's budget. And I just want to give one example, the I-81 project that you mentioned. This is in Western Maryland. It's in an area where there are many warehouses, and there's a boom of warehouses. And so that means more trucks. The road there is basically the truck traffic is 35% of the traffic. It's highest there than anywhere in the state. And you're well aware of the improvements that we're trying to make along that corridor. That project has been defunded, and many projects that were set to begin construction or just about to be bid in this calendar year 2024 are no longer receiving the funding that they need to continue. So do you have a prioritization of all the projects that were defunded or cut with regard to the Vision Zero goals?
Yeah, yes, our projects, clearly that's a safety related project. US 15 is another example. There's a number of them. A lot of these projects have safety components, but clearly that's one of the higher ones from a safety perspective. We are continuing to do design work and positioning those projects. So when dollars are available, we can do them very quickly. And that project was in in the earlier years of the program, to be frank. Some of the other projects still needed work to be done to go into construction, even though there were construction dollars in the out years. Again, we're committed to I-81, to doing that project. We just need to have the dollars to do it.
Well, one of the things we'll be looking for from you is a list of the prioritizations of the projects based on Vision Zero and any other criteria that you use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Watson. Speaker Pro Tem Stein. Oh, don't touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentations about all the major projects. I have another Baltimore County question for you, this time about the Red Line. Could you remind me if the Eastern Baltimore County Access Study about connecting Red Line to new employment centers in the county has been completed yet?
It has not been completed yet. We're actually kind of really still just kind of kicking that off with Baltimore County. So we've had a number of conversations with the county staff over the past 6 months, have been getting a scope for a contractor to come on board and assist us with that effort. And so we're going to be starting public engagement this spring to get a good understanding of, again, what is the scope? You know, we know that there is a huge need in Trade Point. There's also needs a little bit further north up in the Essex area. And so we want to understand, again, what is the scope? What are the alignments that we're looking at and advance that?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up. So will the results of that study, would they be announced at the same time as the mode announcement, or would that be separate?
That would be separate, as it's kind of on a separate track right now. And that is partially intentional because we need to make sure that for the federal government that it's two separate projects. And so it'll be on a separate track, but we will be making sure that we're updating the public and announcing that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon, who is sitting in Delegate Love's seat.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the hospitality up here. It's good to see you all. Administrator Pines, I wanted to say thank you first off to your team for coming out to Montgomery Hills, I guess last month in the old year, and continuing to work forward on it. You know, I think many of us obviously have a lot of concerns that construction dollars were put off, but I'm glad that we're at least advancing the design piece of it. I have two questions in particular to build off of what some of my colleagues have asked about 27495. I will say at the charrette or the public engagement event that was held at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, a lot of my constituents were frankly really unhappy. And I shared their frustration because what we saw on a lot of these boards is sort of, you know, we're doing the project a little different. There's a lot of alternatives here, and I'll hone in on one in particular. You know, as we talk about 270 widening potentially, you know, we've always been talking since this new administration has come in about we're gonna marry this with massive improvements on the Mark Brunswick line. And unfortunately, that public event happened to come out. I think it was literally the week that the updated CTP came out, and so I think there was a lot of cognitive dissonance in folks' minds if we're talking about all of these potential alternatives, but we have literally no money for them. You know, obviously we've restored the 1 year of the midday service to the Mark system. I don't know what happens if the service is successful because we don't have it budgeted for the year after. But can you help me sort of square that circle? How do I tell my constituents we're looking at alternative modes, we're looking at massive expansion on the Brunswick line when we don't have any money for it?
I think that, you know, as a state, right, we need to deal with that issue, right? We have a lot of needs. We have a lot of desires, and we're going to have to wrestle with, you know, what is that level that we can support for those? And I think that's one example. We have the chairman was just, I think, referring to the red line in the same fashion, right? And I think that's the larger discussion that we need to have.
I would say that in the further conversations about 495 and 270, I think we need to add those notes to any presentation materials that go out, because when we say we're working on a widening project that is going to be married with really important enhancements to public transportation that's been on the books or been talked about for a decade, but we don't put an asterisk on it that says, well, we have no funding for any of this. I think it's important to be honest with the public on that, because it's creating a continued feeling of mistrust that I know is not the point of the administration, and frankly something that we're appreciative of, that this is different than the engagement with the last administration. And then the other question that I have is just, as these projects get delayed, we heard in our committee from some of the local jurisdictions that, even at a minimal amount, it's a 5% increase a year. For every year that a project gets delayed, that they don't have the money to be able to do, construction and sign contracts. Do you have any sense from your team when we look at some of the projects in the CTP that have been now put off, what we could be looking at in terms of increased costs if we were to get the money in a year or 2 or 3?
I do not.
So for the SHA projects, I don't want to speak for Holly on the MTA side. Let's take Montgomery Hills as an example. That project, the planned production advertisement that we had was already programmed for 2027. So we have inflation baked in for that being the start date. And as you know, we had the meeting last night, successful, a lot of kudos there. Thank you. We are still moving. We're working on these projects in design and planning. So long as the funding is there to hold those dates like 2027 for Montgomery Hills, we're not expecting additional inflation. The inflation's already baked into that date. If the funding's not there for that date, then delays, the additional inflation would be applied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not specifically asking for SHA. I guess this is open to all modes. What we're looking at in terms of added costs on the state for delaying and putting off projects into the future.
Yeah, so again, it would depend on when we anticipate a construction start date, because we've assumed some inflation in that. And so it would be based on some inflation rate beyond whenever you would start that project.
I think it'd be helpful for us to have if your team could quantify that across the modes, so we kind of know what we might be looking at. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon. We will turn to Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So I look at SHA D&E programs. I want to thank my colleague for the question on the Thomas Johnson Bridge, because I get to straddle both sides. And I look at the Route 5 corridor. So when you say deferred, is it fair to say we have no idea when it's going to when any of these projects are going to get met?
Some of these projects were not, they were not funded for construction to an out year. So if funding were made available, then we would get back to that year. If not, then we'll have to push it out, depending upon when we have the dollars to do it.
Okay, so the Thomas Johnson Bridge has been there for 15 years. We might be looking at past my lifetime. It's probably a fair statement. My second part of the question is you said nothing about the Transportation Trust Fund status. Could you sort of bring us up to speed on that?
Yes. So as we came out with the program, we had over $3 billion hole in the program. Lots of factors drove that, everything from obviously inflation and labor and material costs, the elimination of the COVID dollars we were getting to support major transit systems, both in Baltimore and Washington, that basically have required those dollars to keep those systems at a reduced level and keep them going forward, which then put that pressure on the program. So that's the state of it. The governor did announce $150 million in effect from the general fund to support some of the core activities that we do. And that is, we're looking to the Train Commission and other discussions on how we deal with this larger issue with the trust fund. It's not a new issue. There's some structural issues with the trust fund. They're being compounded by the reduction in motor fuel tax or motor fuel funds because of cars being more efficient and the electrification of the fleet. So these are large structural issues that we have to come to grips with.
So it's probably fair to sit there and we should tell the counties you should be finding ways to raise your own revenues to take care of your roads, since the trust fund probably isn't going to be as lucrative as it has been in the past.
We do, obviously, as you know, we do pass on funds to the local governments for the highway user revenue program. But yeah, they're under a lot of the same pressures.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Morgan. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and your team for the presentation. So I think I'm the only one in this room that represents Anne Arundel County. So even though it is not my district, I want to ask about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Could you elaborate a little bit on that Tier 2 study for corridor alternatives? What is the expected time period for the study? Who's coordinating it? And are there opportunities for public input, public engagement? And part of that public engagement, second part of that question is, can folks sign up like through your website for alerts specific to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, this study and going forward, the developments on the new span?
Sure. I asked Ms. Williams to come to the table since she's running that project, if I could.
Thank you very much. For the record, Melissa Williams, I'm the Director of Planning and Program Development at MDTA. Concerning opportunities for public involvement, we are continuing efforts with public involvement throughout the project. We will be hosting another large public meeting late summer, early fall of this year. As the Secretary indicated, we will be able to show alternatives at that time. In addition, we are having several grassroots efforts where we're going out to supermarkets, blood drives, any kind of festivals that you can think of. We're attending just to raise awareness so people understand that we are working on this project and to try to hear from the constituents and find out what people think and get input from folks. We do anticipate that we'll be meeting with the public, like I said, late summer, early fall of this year. And we're hoping to complete the study about winter 26-27.
Now can they sign up for information?
I'm sorry. Yes, you can absolutely sign up for information. The website is baycrossingstudy.com.
Okay.
And that's baycrossingstudy.com. There's a whole lot of information on that website, including the equity survey that we did, the results of that equity survey, information about our bicycle pedestrian transit listening meeting. You can watch any of our meetings. They've all been recorded. So there's a lot of information for folks, but they can also simply sign up and they would be receiving information about when the next meetings are happening. And you could also provide comments at any time on the website.
Okay. And is there a link on the MTA site to that baycrossing.study.com? I didn't see it, but
MDTA,
I'm sorry.
under projects, under
it is under
yes.
project. Okay.
Yes.
And then can you say one more time, when is the expected end date of that study?
Sure. That would be winter 2026-27.
Okay. So that meeting you referred to later this year, spring or summer, fall, would be well before the end of it. So you're looking for input or more feedback, or what's the purpose of that then?
Absolutely. The purpose of that meeting is to basically show you lines on paper, meaning we'll be actually showing potential alignments of potential crossing alignments. So folks can weigh in and say, give their input, what they think about those potential crossing locations. Then the next step is to take those potential crossing locations, look at them a little bit closer and come up with an MDTA recommended preferred alternative, which we would be showing likely the following year. And then again, once we have a recommendation, we would be taking that to the public again for the public to weigh in and give input on that actual single preferred alternative prior to the finalization of the NEPA process and a decision actually being made by the Federal Highway Administration.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, just the length and the whole like wide area, I think it says 22 miles from the Severn River Bridge and Anne Arundel down to Queen Anne's County, the 5301 split. And then the 2 miles is a reference to what? Because I thought the existing Bay Bridge was 4 or 5 miles long, wide.
So 22 miles, you're correct, is from east of the Severn River Bridge to the 5301 split. That's the length.
Right.
The 2 miles is the width surrounding the existing location. Now you might ask, why 2 miles? The reason we did that was back in Tier 1, when we didn't know where improvements would be made. We looked at 14 separate corridors throughout the Chesapeake Bay, and we had to put some type of parameter to them. So we said we would connect major highways on the eastern and western shores, and we'd do about a 2 mile wide swath because there was no roadways there yet, or no crossings there. So we used that same logic when we chose in Tier 1 Corridor 7, which is the existing alignment, existing location, and we're still within that 2 miles. I can assure you as we're moving forward, as you know, and I know very well, there are an incredible amount of environmental features within the corridor. We're talking both natural environment and man-made environment, and we are absolutely not looking to have adverse impacts beyond what is absolutely necessary. Therefore, we are focusing on the existing corridor itself. That little bit of stretch, keep in mind if there are improvements, modifications where we need to look at interchange modifications or things like that, that certainly takes us away from the alignment just a little bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Edelson is immediately to my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great to see you, Mr. Secretary, and everybody here from the team. I wanted to ask specifically about the Frederick Douglass Tunnel project. This is obviously a very exciting project for, Baltimore City and the whole state, a signature program of President Biden, who even came to the city to announce it. My understanding is the state match is around $450 million for that program. I just wanted to get an understanding of the status of the project and how we expect to be able to make that match happen.
Yeah, so we have that programmed. So that's the dollars are there. We are in some final negotiations with Amtrak on some longer term things that we need to make sure we're clear on with them. But otherwise, they have signed some contractors on board, so they're starting to work. And we continue to work with them very closely on that project. So I don't anticipate anything of a negative nature on that. They're being very aggressive on that project.
Excellent. Thank you.
Delegate Baker.
Don't touch. Okay.
No, no one has to touch their button except me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to I-81. I understand that the funding that has been defunded. And I know for constituents in Western Maryland, that's unacceptable. We're hearing comments on that all the time. And the lady that was here referencing public meetings. How do we go about getting a public meeting sooner rather than later from your department in our community so that our community has the opportunity to ask you questions directly?
Sure. Do we have anything coming up?
We don't have it scheduled at this moment, but I'm happy to work to get something scheduled to provide an update related to.
Okay, and then you would come into the district and provide
Absolutely.
a public hearing. That would be awesome.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of updates too for questions that I didn't have the immediate at my fingertips. So for Delegate Love's question about the American Legion Bridge total that's remaining in the CTP, that's 158 million. As the Secretary mentioned, his memory was better than mine. And related to Delegate Holmes' question on Maryland 197 and Bowie, that project was only funded through 30% design, which was completed last year. So we don't have funding for future phases at this time.
Thank you for the follow-up. I think the second bite at the apple and last question is Delegate Long again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not necessarily an project, but feel free to follow with me offline. Wondering about SHA District 3. Just wondering, is there a reason why two of the largest counties in the state are put together in one district, District 3 for State Highway Administration?
You hate to say like it's what we've always done, but that is a legacy for a long time of our districts. We do have districts that have more counties. I'm not sure if by area, if it's the same, but certainly we recognize that based on lane mileage and other factors, those are very exceptional counties and have the largest budgets typically of all of our districts.
Yeah, I'm just referencing, I guess, population to your largest jurisdictions. And then again, I think resources can be stretched at times as it relates to maintenance and et cetera. So I lift that up a lot and just wanted to ask that again. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Vice Chair has overridden me and she gets the final question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Apologize. I wanted to ask a question that's slightly off topic, but on topic about solar siting and whether or not MDOT has initiatives of looking at initiative of solar for like on canopies and parking lots, landfills, brownfields, so on and so forth.
Yes, we do. We have a program underway now. Some of our initial efforts will be at the airport. if you do know, we actually, when I was at the airport 15 years ago, we put solar on top of the daily garage. And we're looking at those lots around the airport, and we're looking at all of our property. State Highway is as well as MTA. So we have a whole program that's coming out of the Secretary's office to refresh that entire look, and also working with the Department of Environment and others within state government to make sure we're maximizing it.
And those sightings would be to support MDOT's transition to solar or expanding out for other areas?
Could be all the above, really, because, we want to do it in a more of a holistic a way. So we're working through that right now, but we're coming up with a whole plan on it that you'll be seeing shortly.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just to briefly summarize here, here's what I heard. I heard about a lot of great projects you all are working on that many people around this horseshoe care about. We asked you about some of them, but I think there's a champion for every project that you named, even the ones that get a specific shout out. But I also heard there's basically no plan to fund any of them other than we want a federal contribution. But as you said, that requires state resources to get that federal contribution. So that's what I heard coming out of this briefing on the major projects from the Maryland Department of Transportation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the subcommittee for joining us from appropriations. Colleagues, we will now transition to the overview of the Critical Areas Program. A briefing from the Critical Areas Commission for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays. I believe we have Chair Eric Fisher, Legislative and Regulations Coordinator Lisa Horger, Program Chief Nick Kelly, and Program Chief Charlotte Sheeran. And please come on up to the table. Thank you so much. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. I'll do a couple of quick introductory remarks while we call up the presentation. We're very pleased to provide an overview of the Critical Area Program to you all today. We are turning 40 years old this year, so it seems especially appropriate to be in front of you. We're going to talk basically in three parts today about the program and where we are and where we're headed. First, we're going to look at the structure of the commission as a longstanding state and local partnership. We're going to look at the essential role that this committee and the General Assembly has played in giving the commission the tools it needs to do its job. And then we're going to look ahead to some of the opportunities and frankly, some of the imperatives that we see moving forward to remain an effective instrument of government. So with that, let's begin with the structure of the program. What are we? Critical Area Program is a resource protection program. So we're in the space of green infrastructure. We just spent about an hour talking about gray infrastructure. We talk about green infrastructure and how to protect it to meet our water quality and habitat goals for the bay and its tidal landscapes. We ensure sensitive development near our shorelines. We work cooperatively with our local partners. And our role as a state commission is to ensure consistent and equitable implementation across those jurisdictions. Specifically, the critical area is everything you see in yellow. It's all land within 1,000 feet of tidal water of the Chesapeake Bay. It's about 11% of the state, touches about 16 counties, Baltimore City, and 47 of our more than 100 municipalities. If you zoom in on that little ribbon of land, that valuable ribbon of land, we come in two parts. The first part is the first 100 feet back from tidal water. That's known as the critical area buffer. And it is where in many cases, the most sensitive environmental resources are located, and it receives the highest level of protection. The remaining 900 feet, give or take, that's the rest of the critical area. And those upland habitats are very important for the sustainability and the function both of the buffer and of the bay writ large. The structure of our commission, we're a big one, 29 members from across Tidewater, Maryland. But what that means is that we have very good representation of the diversity of our state, from our urban jurisdictions to our more rural. And you can see there on the right, the current composition of the commission. This varies slightly over the years, but for the most part, we are about 75% local government. We are an independent executive commission. We are administratively housed within the Department of Natural Resources to maintain efficiencies But in terms of policy and decision-making, we are an independent commission. We do have legislative oversight provided by a special joint committee. And we're very pleased that our co-chair Delegate Stein is with us today, Delegate Love and Delegate Allen. Thank you all for your work on that committee. Our work is supported by a 15-member staff and a full-time chair. That's myself. And we operate with about a $2.5 million budget. That's this year. About 140,000 of that goes back out the door to local jurisdictions to help them implement their programs. There is a role both for the commission itself and for our local governments, and we break that out in detail here for you. In general, the state commission's role is to ensure consistency and equitable implementation of the state law, while the local role is to do the actual on-the-ground land use planning and implementation work. One thing I did want to highlight from here is the variances and the enforcement, because I know you all get calls about that. That is generally a local implementation role. The state commission can insert itself as a party to those proceedings when necessary, but it is initiated and run by local governments. And with that, we're going to turn to the legislature's role, and I'll pass it over to Ms. Herger to take us through that piece.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Thank you, Chair Corman and members of the committee for having us today. I'm just going to briefly run through where we came from. Where did this thing happen? How did it start? And back in the late 1970s, the early 1980s, the Environmental Protection Agency did a comprehensive study of the bay and its tidal tributaries and found a lot of bad news, which some of you are very familiar with. Declining water quality and resources. Many of the drivers had to do with what was happening on the land. So the governor at that time, Governor Hughes, which you can see in this picture, looked at land use programs around the country and modeled our program after that. And there was also a lot of discussion that happened before the next things happened in our history, which you can see on your screen, which after that EPA study, the General Assembly, this body, enacted our law in 1984, hence our 40-year birthday. And 2 years later, the General Assembly also approved the regulations that accompanied that law in 1986. So from that point, we hit the ground running. In about 1985, they formed the staff. And in that period, in the early years, we were actually working with our local government partners, putting together their local critical area programs, which are enforced through their zoning ordinances and subdivision ordinances. Also, what the commission was very involved in is putting together policy documents, because we had a lot of questions from our local partners about how do we count lot coverage? What does it look like? How do we manage our growth allocation resources? So we did that up until we hit the 2000s. And many of you may recall, before I get into 2008, in 2002, the Atlantic coastal bays were added to the critical area law. So we were fortunate to have that happen in 2002. And then a few years later, we had another comprehensive update in 2008. And that was a comprehensive overhaul of the statute. And it did a lot of things that helped local governments and gave them tools with regard to their regulatory authority. The growth allocation standards gave them more flexibility and more standards to use when reviewing them. And there was also a 200-foot buffer that was put into the resource conservation area of the critical area, which constitutes about 80% of the critical area. We gave local governments, or you all gave local governments, enforcement tools so they could go on properties, they could better enforce some more of the egregious violations that we had been seeing through that ensuing decade or so. And then finally, one of the other big updates was to update that 1,000-foot critical area boundary line, which is another one of my duties at the commission, which we are hastily finishing. So that brings us up to speed to 2008. And I'm not sure.
You might be going
We're
backwards.
going backwards.
There we go.
We'll go forwards. So where that brings us now is since 2008, we've been doing the map updates. The lower shore is the last few counties that we are getting to, but the rest of the state is completed. And we've been doing regulations since that time, because in the 2008 House bill, you all gave us the ability to do regulations for the first time as a state agency.
So since then, we have a list of regulations, but we're just highlighting a few that we started and we put together that we hope will, well, we have seen and we've gotten feedback on since then, help our local governments more efficiently administer their local critical area programs, which, did I get backwards again?
Try the arrows. Here you go. Try the arrows.
My apologies. I knew I saw that slide. One of the things we do with our regulatory process before we even go to the AELR committee is we start way ahead of time. So one of the things we've been doing since I've been working for the commission in the early 1990s is regular quarterly meetings with our local critical area planners. And we do that faithfully. We just had one last Friday. And we put on our agendas anything that they're concerned about, that they want to, share information between their other critical area planners and things that they want us to work on. And then one of the first big regulation changes that we made was to our buffer regulations. And we had what we called targeted feedback meetings. So outside of those quarterly meetings with the local planners, we would set aside half a day and just sit down with them and knock those things out because we wanted to make sure that things were going to work on the ground. We weren't going to do that in a vacuum. So we're pretty proud about that. And also, usual correspondence that we have with these folks at the local level. And then the full commission, the 29-member commission that Chair Fisher mentioned earlier, reviews those proposed drafts before they even hit the AELR committee. So these things are fully vetted through our local government partners and through the 29-member commission before we send them to the formal process. Am I going backwards?
Sorry. There you go.
And the regulations that I wanted to point out were the buffer regulations, which I've mentioned. Just 2 years ago, we completed renewable energy regulations to give local government partners tools to cite them when they come up in certain areas within the critical areas. So there won't be an impediment to them for that. We've updated our shore erosion control and water dependent facilities regulations in conjunction with the Maryland Department of the Environment to make sure that our regulations are consistent with theirs. And we've also worked on the variance and after the fact variance requests because we've had a lot of attention given to that from our local government folks. So when we hear those things, we try and make things work more efficiently for them. And this is a quick picture of one of our critical area map updates. I know it looks a little bit like a Mickey Mouse, but just to explain to you what you're seeing in the picture, the blue line in the center is the edge of the shoreline. The yellow line that is just beyond it is the edge of tidal wetlands. And those are important because that is the point at which we begin to draw the 1,000-foot boundary landward, which is the green line that you see. And then when you see the red area, this is an example of where we've had a loss of critical area based on our updated mapping technologies. So the existing line is about in the area of the green line on here. I'm sorry, on the red line. And we are removing that area from the critical area. And then alternatively, on the right side of your screen, you'll see a green area. And that's an area where we've had a gain. So what's happened in the 40 years since the original maps were done is we've had some wetlands that have expanded in that area and retracted in other areas. So this is just an example of what we've been seeing kind of across the board on critical area mapping. And we see those changes because those original maps that we used were 1972 aerials that were very blurry and they weren't always drawn when local planners were drawing the 1,000-foot boundary on those maps back in 1986. They were doing it with magic markers. So that's another reason we have some of these inconsistencies. This is on our website and it shows you the areas that are completed are the counties in green. The county in orange, which is Somerset County, is currently reviewing their maps at their local level. And the counties in yellow are getting ready to go to public information meetings. So they're very close to the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Fisher.
Great. So I get to tell you the good stuff. We feel like this past 40 years, it's been a very effective program that the General Assembly set up and that the executive branch has carried forward. It's a pretty unique partnership between state and local governments. There aren't a lot of structures like this in the state or around the country, and we believe it's been very effective. We've reviewed collectively more than 28,000 development projects since 1988. And in many of those cases, we've been able to preserve or protect large contiguous forested tracts with protected habitat. We also pay special attention to public access because what good is the bay if no one can reach it? And so where we can, we preserve or we expand public access to the waterways and the shoreline habitats for people. We have also worked to protect about 3,100 miles of shoreline and buffer through regulations. Those aren't purchases, it's not land conservation, but that is regulation and working out with local jurisdictions. So I believe it's been an effective partnership, but as any boat captain or pilot knows, in order to stay on course, sometimes you have to make adjustments. And so before we leave you today, we wanted to just touch on a few things that we see as major issues, imperatives that we are working to address going forward, and frankly, could use some of your help. Those issues are climate resilience, ensuring equitable outcomes, and administrative efficiency. The shorelines in Maryland are in many ways the front lines of climate change. We're dealing with flooding, we're dealing with erosion, we're dealing with sea level rise. We're also mindful that the experience of those impacts are generally not the same. There's a diversity of communities who call our shorelines home. And in many cases, those impacts range from different to unjust. So we want to make sure that we are accounting for that in our program as well. And we learn as we go. And we want to stay efficient and effective and in service to the public and our local partners. Just a couple of quick short stories to illustrate where we are headed and what we're looking at. This is a development site that came before the commission this past April, and inside the box looks fairly unremarkable today. But when we approve development, we are bringing people, structures, and infrastructure onto the landscape that will be there for the next 50, 75, 100 years. And when we put those glasses on, we see a very different future. What you're seeing here is the effects of 2 to 5 feet of sea level rise, which is not an unreasonable expectation within the development window of the project that we were considering approval for. And then if you add the impacts of storm, this is the climate ready action boundary, which tends to provide those that information. This project is in the bay, at least during that event. The commission approved this project with very minor changes from what was submitted. And the reason for that is because the words climate and resilience do not appear in our statute. It's very difficult for us as a commission to talk about these issues without that mandate, let alone manage them. That said, we are working as far as we can to deal with some of the issues you see on the screen here, both at state and local governments, recognizing that our wetlands in many cases are moving or need to move in order to stay in place, addressing intensifying development, as I described, in areas prone to flooding. Where we have environmental mitigation, we want to make sure that it will survive a hotter, wetter, saltier shoreline. And finally, helping local governments have tools and incentives to deal with these issues on the ground as well. Second issue, of course, is equitable outcomes. What you're looking at on the screen now is a fantastic tool from the Department of the Environment. Some of you may be familiar with it. This is EJ Screen, and it does an excellent job of highlighting disparities in environmental impact. What you're seeing on the screen now is a typical example of a development project that the commission and local jurisdictions are asked to weigh in on and approve. What you're looking at now is what the commission doesn't do, that we are looking to change in terms of practice, and that is overlay EJ Screen with the development projects that we are evaluating. And had we done that, we would have learned that this site is in about 74th percentile for environmental justice impact, at least in terms of EJ Screen. What do we do with that information? Well, one thing that we could have done is change the mitigation that was required for the site. Part of the mitigation package for this was public access to the water. The biggest reason that the EJ score on this site is so high is because of water contact advisories and the inability to touch the water. So it's quite possible that we could have come up with a more suitable mitigation, perhaps something that would improve water quality before we invite people into it. Again, there are some things that we can do and that we are working on as a commission, but we will not have access to the full suite of tools without a change in our statute. Considering environmental burdens and benefits, matching mitigation to impacts and opportunities, as I just described, increasing our representation, both in public participation. That should also say our commission itself. We're working on that as well. And again, securing where it makes sense, access to our waterways. Finally, I'm not going to walk through these in detail, but we have identified a number of areas along with our local partners where we think we can simplify and streamline our processes to be more effective. These would also require a change in statute. We will be back before you in a couple of weeks. This is a little bit of a preview. House Bill 233 and Senate Bill 306 would adopt many of the efficiencies and initiate the conversations that we feel we need to have for climate and equity. And then Senate Bill 268 makes some clarifying changes to our enforcement procedures. With that, I want to thank you for your time this morning and turn it back to Chair Quinn.
Thank you very much to you and the commission. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I think you just addressed my question, which was, am I correct that you are kind of inviting the legislature to fix these issues? But it sounds like that's going to be the case. Is that true with HB 233? And okay.
That's correct. It's been 16 years since our statute has been touched by the legislature. And
Wow.
There's been a number of issues that are starting to pile up.
Great, good to hear. My other question though is what, in reviewing local projects, so what practical effect does the commission's position, review, approval, disapproval, or recommended changes have when it comes to local land use decisions? What does that look like?
Yes, thank you for the question. So it depends on the nature of the proposal, and it tends to hinge on whether or not there is a request to intensify the use beyond what is currently permitted by zoning. So if a jurisdiction is looking to upzone a property at the request of an applicant or because it's consistent with their comprehensive plan, those intensification requests, as the one I showed you related to the storage facility and the sea level rise, those come to the commission for a straight up approval, disapproval, approval with conditions, or a return to the local jurisdiction. That is a specific process called growth allocation. And that is something that the commission has a direct influence on. If it is simply a project that implements existing zoning, then we generally do not see those as a full commission. They come into our staff for review and comment to ensure consistency, but the approval authority remains exclusively at the local level.
Okay, and a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. What about the kind of comprehensive rezoning plans that jurisdictions go through usually, well, typically the ones I'm aware of every 5 to 10 years? Do you get involved with those during that process or afterward if a property has been rezoned in a comprehensive way before the project? Well, I guess when the project then comes to your attention.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when the local jurisdiction updates its comprehensive plan, it goes to the Department of Planning, and then it is farmed out to the agencies. And we are part of that 60-day review process. So we do comment where we can. We also have each local jurisdiction has a dedicated critical area program, which comprises its policies, its ordinances related to everything that happens within that first 1,000 feet. And we want to make sure that their comprehensive plan and their critical area program are aligned and consistent. Right now, that needs to be updated. That local critical area program needs to be updated every 6 years. One of the things that the legislation that you'll be reviewing in a couple of weeks will seek to bump that back to the 10-year cycle that comprehensive plans are currently on to make sure we maintain that consistency.
Great, good. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. I do not see any other questions. So thank you again for being with us. We appreciate the update. Colleagues, we will now turn to the Maryland Public Ethics Overview. We have Jennifer Algar, Executive Director of the State Ethics Commission, Kate Thompson, Staff Counsel at the Ethics Commission, and of course, someone we all know but only like to meet with once a year, Dia Daly. And I will turn it over to you all to go in whatever order you see fit.
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, thank you so much, members of the committee, for inviting us to give this ethics briefing today. My name is Jennifer Algar. I'm the Executive Director for the Maryland State Ethics Commission. And with me here is Kate Thompson. Kate is our staff counsel. So we're here to hopefully answer some questions and give you a little bit of overview about the Maryland State Ethics Commission, the programs that the commission administers, and the work that the State Ethics Commission does. The State Ethics Commission is an independent agency. We have a 5-member commission. Our commissioners can serve up to 2 5-year terms. Our commissioners are appointed by the governor. One is the nominee of the president of the Senate, and one is the nominee of the Speaker of the House of Delegates, and one of the governor's nominees must be of the opposite sitting political party for the sitting governor. We have a staff of 13. We just recently added one more attorney position, which we desperately needed. So thank you all for passing that budget. Our commission meets about 6 to 8 times a year. We now have to live video stream our public portions of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman Corman, for that bill last year. We're getting used to that. We're kind of late to that game, but we're getting there. And thank you to the Do It staff that helps us to put that video stream together and house that on our website. Some of the other things that the Ethics Commission does at meetings, I know Dia was going to talk about what the Joint Committee does, but just to give you a little bit of a flavor of what the State Ethics Commission does at its meetings is in the open portion of the meeting, it reviews financial disclosure positions that are going to be added as required to file a financial disclosure statement, reviews new state boards and commissions that have been created to determine whether or not the members of that particular board or commission will be subject to the ethics law. We review legislation, anything that's been filed or updated that may impact the public ethics law or the administration of any of the programs that the commission has. Talk about that. We have a lot of advice requests that the commission reviews at every meeting. A lot of that is state employees' secondary employment requests, participation restrictions, gifts, post-employment advice, things like that. We have an enforcement matters portion of our agenda. That's what Kate will handle, and Kate's going to talk a little bit more extensively a little later about the Ethics Commission's enforcement programs. But that covers financial disclosure, lobbying, reporting, also conflict of interest matters, training matters, potential settlements. Some of the other programs that the commission does administer that you may be familiar with is the lobbying program. The commission is in charge of registering lobbyists, making sure lobbyists report, make sure they take their mandatory training, make sure that we house that information so it's publicly accessible through our electronic system to be viewed. We also have a very large advice and training portion of a program that we administer. Employees that file a financial disclosure statement, elected officials that are subject to the State Ethics Commission, and lobbyists are all required to take a mandatory ethics training. So we do that. We do some of those live Zoom. We do electronic training. We have those programs. Also with the advice, and our advice is confidential, just like the advice that you get from Dia. But that advice is confidential, subject to some restrictions where if the State Ethics Commission grants exceptions for secondary employment or financial interests for certain elected officials or secretaries of departments, then our Ethics Commission has to provide notice to the General Assembly about those exceptions. And that's Delegate Stewart's bill from a few years ago there. Some other programs that we have is with local government. Many of the local governments, the counties, many municipalities, about 75 or so, and boards of education have to have their own local ethics laws or policies. Our office's role in that is to help them get there. The ethics law has certain requirements that those local entities have to include in their local ethics laws. Our office reviews the local ethics policies, points out where they might have to make a change or add something, and then try to help them, pull them across the line and do that, because we recognize that a lot of the local governments, especially the municipalities, have some resource issues with staff. You have a town clerk that is in charge of drafting this and could probably use some help from the Ethics Commission on that. So we do a lot of that. We also, capture all of the certifications every year that the local governments file, letting us know that they are still in compliance. The same with bi-county commissions now have to send us an annual certification. We review the ethics policies for bi-county commissions and their lobbying provisions too, and give them guidance on that. And we try to update our local government regulations and model laws to reflect any changes that come out from the last legislative session. You all are familiar with our financial disclosure program that you have to file every year by April 30th, that I'm sure everyone will take care of. But in addition to the elected officials and members of the General Assembly, many elected executive branch officials have to file. Many state employees file. We have about 15,000 state employees that file an annual financial disclosure statement. It's employees that are generally at a grade 16 or above, which is about a $57,000 a year salary, and have certain duties. They qualify to be financial disclosure filers. So we have them filing, helping them to do that. Many boards and commissions also file a reduced disclosure form, but a Form 2. We have about 3,300 board members that file an annual financial disclosure statement. So we have that as well. Try to make sure they're all filed electronically. Try to make sure that we're assisting everyone and answering their questions. The staff spends a lot of time doing that. And then we have an enforcement process, and I'll let Kate handle that because Kate is the enforcement attorney in our office. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us here. So grateful to be with you. Already excited about the bills that are coming in this year that we're watching. I am the staff counsel. I have 2 paralegals that work with me for our enforcement. Like Jen said, we cover all of the state employees, including some of the state agencies that you may not think of, and sometimes they don't think of themselves as state employees, like TEDCO, Stadium Authority, all the University System of Maryland employees are covered under our law. And the community college employees as well. So a big, broad group of employees covered under the conflicts of interest provisions. We take complaints, referrals, anonymous tips on any unethical behavior for any of them. I think similar to the Joint Committee in that way. So we get official complaints that come in. We get a lot of referrals from agencies, and we get a great number of referrals from the Office of Legislative Audits that discover ethics issues while they are in their audit system. So they come from all over. We process them. They are confidential throughout the whole process until there is a finding of a violation. But we open both inquiries and full investigations. We have a lot of different processes to work through it, but we do conflict of interest investigations, financial disclosure investigations. We do lobbying matters. A lot of the lobbying matters are just, you're late again. Please stop. Please sign this agreement, acknowledging that you're late again. A lot of what we do, I think, is accountability, right? So that's why our findings are public. We do fines and fees sometimes, especially if there's sort of a misappropriation of what we think state resources. But a lot of what we do is like, listen, we're going to tell the public what you did inappropriate. And that is sort of your punishment, right? This acknowledgement of your actions. So we do conflicts, lobbying, training, late financial disclosure filings for state employees and employees that have left state service. Most matters are resolved through agreements. We can do a formal hearing process, but most of the time, if we are at the point where we're at that point, they don't want to argue anymore, right? It's very clear that there's been a mistake. And so they're usually pretty willing to acknowledge it publicly. You can find all of our agreements, both lobbying and conflict of interest, on our website back to 2006. All the rest, you can come visit us at Calvert Street and look at them if you'd like to. So we have those on our website. And I think one of the most important things to know is that our advice, our complaints are confidential, our investigations are confidential. I think that really protects both sides, right? And then after last year, former Delegate Learman, now Comptroller Learman, put in a bill that protects against retaliation for either participating in an enforcement matter or filing an enforcement complaint. And so you're protected against any adverse employment action related to those actions in our law. And our commission does all different kinds each year, but we usually have about 10 things going at once, and it's always very exciting. So we also do cover your staff. So if they ever need advice, they can come to us as well.
Just a few points that we just want to emphasize for all the members of the committee. The first one is with your own personal financial disclosure accounts, please keep the contact information current in there. Please make sure that it's an email address in your financial disclosure account that you actually check regularly, because the email address that's associated with your electronic financial disclosure account is the account where any notice is sent if a member of the public views your financial disclosure statement. So you want to make sure that you are getting that information. Also, if our office is trying to contact you about your financial disclosure statement, we do audit financial disclosure statements that are submitted, and see some of you nodding. You might have gotten an email from us from time to time about the audits, but we reach out to you at the email address that's in your financial disclosure account. So please make sure that that is current. If you were to leave the General Assembly, also make sure you update that email address so you would continue to be notified if someone would look at your form, and that we would have a contact for you if we would need to reach out and contact you in for any reason about your financial disclosure statement. Another thing to please keep in mind is anytime there is a bill that does make a change to the public ethics law, not only does it affect the state employees and the State Ethics Commission, but if it changes the conflict of interest provisions or the financial disclosure requirements in the public ethics law, that is something that is very likely going to have to trickle down to the local governments and have them also update their local ethics law. So we, at our end, when that thing, when those changes occur, we update our regulations, we have to update our model laws, but then we also are reaching out to all of the 24 counties, the 24 boards of education, all the various municipalities that are required to have a local ethics law, and then trying to bring them herd those cats, as we call them in our office, and try to get them to also enact those changes in their local ethics laws as well. So we just want to make sure that that's something that we do emphasize to you. And then another thing, I guess, with any changes that would require a change in our financial disclosure system, our lobbying system, or updates to our electronic training systems. Of our 13 employees in the State Ethics Commission, none of them are IT. So all of our electronic systems, anything that requires any kind of IT programming is taken care of by outside vendors. So you will see fiscal notes that would come back on that legislation. It will include what seems to me to be extremely high prices for IT services, but we have learned in the last couple of years with these vendors that that's just what it costs. So that wouldn't be unusual. And that's what's driving that, is that those services are provided to our office by outside IT vendors. But anytime you have any questions about those fiscal notes or about those figures, please reach out. And that's really the last thing I want to emphasize is anytime you all have a question about your own financial disclosure filing or the financial disclosure program or any impact that a piece of legislation may or may not have on the provisions of the public ethics law, Kate and I are the legislative contacts for our office. We're happy to answer your questions, or at least try, or at least figure out where else we need to call to get that information for you. But one other thing is I want to pay a compliment to the committee staff. They're also always very helpful to us. Kate and I have been working with Patrick Tracy for many, many years, and he's always wonderful to our office, and so is the entire committee staff. So we'd like to see that continue. Again, thanks again for the invitation, and we're happy to try to answer your questions.
Dia, you want to go ahead?
Okay. For the record, Dia Daly, Ethics Counsel to the General Assembly. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm sure that some of you get tired of seeing me. If you have not scheduled your annual meetings, please call me. It's not painful. I haven't made anyone cry this year. So when I talk to you in those meetings, when I talk to you on the phone, by email, we're always talking about conduct rules, what you can do, what you can't do. We're talking about disclosure rules. What do you have to disclose? How do you disclose it? But when I look around this room, I realize that there are only 2 of you who have ever spent any time on the Ethics Committee. So what I thought I would do today is pull back the curtain and give you guys a little bit of insight on what the Ethics Committee does. So all of those fun forms that you file, not your annual financial disclosure statement that Jen and her team review, but all those other forms that you're filing with the Ethics Committee, where you're disclaiming an appearance of a conflict, where you're documenting your recusal, where you are telling the Ethics Committee where you work, where your spouse works, businesses from which you're earning income. The Ethics Committee actually reviews all of those forms. They do that in open session, and the committee is going to look to see, do we need some additional information? Is this something where you disclaimed a conflict, but actually you should recuse yourself? Is your handwriting terrible and the public cannot read the disclosure? The committee is going to look at that. Now, I will tell you, most of the time you file those forms with the committee and you are never going to hear anything else about it, because I view my job as making sure your stuff is in good shape before it gets to the committee. So if anyone wants to look at those forms, they are available to be viewed in my office, and we also do post them on the General Assembly's website. After that, after the review of the forms, someone makes a motion to close the Ethics Committee meeting to comply with this statutory requirement that everything else the committee does is kept confidential. And then the committee will move on to advice matters. During that conversation, the committee will talk about the various questions you've asked. You may ask if you can have an exemption from the prohibition against receiving income from a state entity to be a substitute teacher in your local school system. You may ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, or the committee hasn't opined on it. You may ask a question that it's a pretty sensitive question. It involves a highly regulated industry. So you and I might think it's better for you to get some advice from the committee rather than just me. And on occasion, I might be wrong, and you might tell me you disagree with the advice that I've given, and you might want the committee's advice. So what we do, I will present your question to the committee. I will present any other materials, documents you've provided. The committee will talk about the law. They'll talk about opinions. They'll talk about what advice they've given in prior situations and make a decision. I think Delegate Stein and Delegate Holmes will agree with me that the Ethics Committee is a very collaborative body, and most of the decisions are unanimous. I don't see personal feelings, friendships coming into play. The members of the committee do take their job very seriously. So the committee makes a decision, and we're going to follow up with something in writing. I try to get those letters out as quickly as possible after the committee gives that advice. This is the point in the meeting where the committee will talk about any necessary changes to opinions, any legislative changes that are going to require some additional advice from the committee. Sometimes there are new things that come up that the committee needs to provide guidance on. For example, a few years ago, when we rolled out a program for you to send electronic newsletters, the committee decided to issue some frequently asked questions to give you some guidance as to what you can and can't do. So that's pretty much what we do during the advice portion of the meeting. Next, we move on to everybody's favorite part, enforcement. I'm not part of handling complaints. We have a couple other attorneys on staff who handle complaints. Any person can file a complaint alleging that a member has violated the standards of legislative ethics. We need to know who the legislator is who allegedly did the bad thing, what they allegedly did with some specificity. You can't just say Dia Daly is unethical. You would have to say Dia Daly accepted a gift of a car from a lobbyist, which, by the way, nobody's ever given me a car. And we need to know who's filing the complaint, so we know, who we can talk to get additional information. The law also allows the Ethics Committee to issue a complaint on its own motion. Quite often that happens when we read an article in the newspaper. We hear that something kind of inappropriate is going on. The committee may issue a complaint on its own. The law also allows the speaker or the president to refer any matter to the committee. So we get a complaint. The other attorneys on staff are going to conduct an investigation. They may talk to the complainant. They may talk to other witnesses. They're going to review documents. They are going to talk to the member who the complaint is filed against to get some additional information. So you won't be surprised. You won't suddenly get a letter from the Ethics Committee saying you did something terrible. You will have some communication with the staff. Staff is doing their work. They are then going to present it to the committee. Again, that's done in closed session. They're going to talk about what they found in their investigation, what other similar enforcement matters the committee has had. They're going to talk about what the law says, what the opinions say, and the committee will make a decision. The committee has a few options. If a complaint is frivolous, the committee is going to dismiss it. If, let's say it was a minor error and it's been addressed, the committee may say, you shouldn't have done that. Don't do it again. Sometimes the committee will send you a letter of education. As the speaker likes to say, we want you to succeed. And one of the ways you succeed is when you make a mistake, you understand why. So the letter that you get, if the committee thinks that you did something wrong, it's a pretty detailed, long letter because we want you to learn from the experience. Sometimes the committee may say, ooh, this is a tough one. This is an ugly situation. We need to conduct additional proceedings. And that's when the committee would hold a hearing. It's your standard administrative hearing. Witnesses are called, people are sworn, there's a court reporter. If the legislator wants to be represented by counsel, they can. The committee goes through that whole process. And then we go back to those options we had before. The complaint can be dismissed. The committee can refer a matter to the speaker or the president. They may make a recommendation that the appropriate presiding officer take a certain action. In really bad situations, the committee will make a report to the full House or the full Senate. And that's where there's a recommendation that someone be publicly reprimanded, publicly censured, or heaven forbid, expelled from the General Assembly. Doesn't happen very often. And I like to say that's because I'm good at my job and make sure you guys don't do those bad things. But that's how that process works. That's pretty much an ethics committee meeting. Before I conclude, though, I have to give you one little advice tidbit. I understand that there may be a football game that some people care about on Sunday. In my family, we support the other team in Maryland, so I didn't know people played football in January. So if you want to go to the game, remember sports tickets are never a legal gift from a controlled donor unless it's coming from a government entity. So if the governor gives you a ticket, you can go to the game this weekend. If you have your own tickets, you can go to the game. If your mother gives you tickets, you can go to the game. If a lobbyist gives you tickets or an entity that employs a lobbyist, you cannot take those tickets. Remember, a gift isn't a gift if you pay for it. You have to pay the fair market value. The paranoid lawyer in me says, write a check, pay via Venmo, pay via Cash App. So you have documentation that you paid. So, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. My question is Taylor Swift a lobbyist or someone who employs a lot? Who knows? You don't know me that well, Delegate Foley. Delegate Stewart, first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all so much for coming. This was informative and great to hear. I know it's been a few years since we've heard from y'all, so this has been great. I have two questions. Both of them relate, I think, to the tension that sometimes exists in all of your work between, I think, privacy on the one hand and then transparency on the other. And so my first question is, there's some chatter a couple of years ago in the press about a complaint that was filed against a former elected official in Maryland, and how nothing had really been heard on this. And that the policy of the State Ethics Commission is that if a violation occurs, then obviously a report is issued as to, that person either admitting to a violation or a violation being found, but there's not necessarily a publication of, an investigation that winds down, and there's not necessarily going to be confirmation that a complaint is still being investigated. Could you guys talk us through a little bit about when disclosure does happen, when disclosure does not happen, and sort of how you've come at trying to strike that right balance between privacy and transparency?
Right. Thank you for that question. That when the State Ethics Commission receives a complaint, they follow the statutory provisions in the public ethics law, and with the statutory provisions in the public ethics law as it relates to a complaint, complaints are confidential. That confidentiality is binding on the person that files the complaint. That confidentiality is binding on the respondent, the person against whom the complaint was filed. And that confidentiality is binding on the commission staff. The confidentiality provisions related to complaints exist, and they continue unless there is a finding of a violation. If there is a finding of a violation of a provision of the public ethics law, the finding of the violation would be public, either through the findings that the commission held a hearing and issued a finding of fact, conclusion of law. That finding of a violation, that would be public, that would be posted on the commission's website. If there was a complaint that was investigated, and as a result of that investigation, the evidence was enough that the person against whom the complaint was filed agrees to admit that there was a violation of a provision of the public ethics law and signs an agreement, that agreement would be a public finding of a violation. That's in those agreements that the person signing the agreement waives the confidentiality and understands that this will be a public finding. Absent a finding of a violation, it does not become public. So the commission very well, just like the joint committee, could receive a complaint, could investigate a complaint and close a complaint, and nothing is put out for public consumption related to that. And I think the policy behind that, from my understanding at my time at the commission, has been that if there isn't a finding of a violation, it doesn't go out into public consumption, because then it would always be, complaint filed, investigation done, but there was never a finding of the violation. So that is the compliance with the statute there in the public ethics law.
I think one of the things to be aware of, if someone files a complaint with either the ethics committee or the ethics commission, their law tracks ours here. The person who files the complaint is notified of the disposition.
Right.
I have had situations where sometimes the person who files the complaint says, I didn't get that notice, and then I forward them the email that I sent them 6 months ago. But
yeah, and I can tell you that that is also in the provision for the State Ethics Commission. Thank you, Dia, for that reminder that the person that has filed a complaint will receive something.
Mhm.
The State Ethics Commission generally doesn't send it by email. It is sent out by, it had been regular mail.
Mm.
So because email tends to get forwarded all around town. And so generally our correspondence is sent the old fashioned way, or at least it was.
And that correspondence would be something like if someone filed a complaint and it was deemed not to be substantiated, it would just be say something like, we've closed, thank you for filing a complaint. We've closed the matter without finding them of violation, or just we
Yeah.
closed the matter.
Yes, the letter would go to the person that filed the complaint, let them know what day the State Ethics Commission reviewed the complaint, reviewed the investigation, and made that determination and closed the complaint. And that's the end. And there may be times that a complaint is, reviewed by the commission. And if they don't take action on it, if, like Dia was saying with a frivolous complaint, the commission may review a complaint at a meeting and decline to issue the complaint. The person against whom it was filed may never know that that complaint was ever received against them because the commission didn't issue that.
So on the ethics committee side, the letter that we send to the complainant will spell out the reason, the statutory provision under which we dismissed the complaint. It was frivolous. There wasn't enough evidence. We sent our letter of education. And our letters generally say, yes, we found that Dia Daly didn't disclose that she had 1 share of stock in whatever, but she's now disclosed it, and we've decided there's no reason to do anything else. So they get a shorter letter than what the member would get.
That makes sense. I have one other question, Mr. Chair, if I could. And it has to do actually with y'all's cooperation, because you mentioned that the bill that I sponsored, that the legislature passed,
Yes.
Unanimously, I might add, a couple of years ago. That one other kind of issue that had arisen also in response to a former elected official was that when the state ethics commission gives advice or MOUs, even if it's either published or not, non-written advice, that information was basically being, under lock and key and not being shared with the presiding officers or the joint ethics committee. And we tweaked that a little bit in the bill. And so I just want, if y'all could talk a little bit about sort of what
Sure.
that relationship looks like now after the passage of the bill. And obviously we struggled with sort of, on the one hand, we didn't want, confidentiality is really important because we want people to report and we want people to be honest about their situation. We want people to seek advice. At the same time, we want to make sure that, the legislative branch is all kind of talking, at least some elements of it, the leaders, and also that are aware of things going on in other branches. So, yeah.
Well, the provision that Delegate Stewart is talking about is when the State Ethics Commission grants an exception to allow outside employment or the continued ownership of a financial interest in some type of entity that has some type of contractual relationship or regulatory relationship with the employee, well, the officials, governmental unit in this instance, or has employment or a financial interest in that type of entity. And the State Ethics Commission looks at everything and says, okay, we're going to grant an exception to allow you to continue to hold ownership in this particular business or hold this outside employment while you also hold this office. Generally, the commission also gives them advice on additional restrictions of the ethics law, like what their participation restrictions might be, what the prestige of office restrictions would be, what the use of confidential information would be, those restrictions in the ethics law, and give them all that advice. And now when it is an elected executive branch official, the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, treasurer, secretary, just those elected.
Maybe
I think.
secretary.
Can you check that one? We want to make sure we're totally clear on that.
I don't think the secretary says.
No, okay, that's a different one. So it's just those elected officials. If the State Ethics Commission grants an exception to allow them to hold that, now we have to also notify the General Assembly that the State Ethics Commission has granted this exception to allow this, and give a general, information about that. What we have done since that legislation has passed, because I don't think that we have granted that and have had to give any notice since the legislation was enacted, is we've made sure that that information is included in the training that our office gives to the elected executive branch officials to let them know that this is fine if you're going to seek an exception to hold on to this particular thing. Please know that this advice, the confidentiality stands, but there is this notice requirement and transfer of information that comes to the General Assembly. So that's what we've done on our end, is try to make sure that they're aware of that requirement.
I would just add, just in practical terms, when we give advice to state employees about participation and about secondary employment, our advice is confidential, obviously, but it often requires notice to the other people impacted by the advice, right? So if the advice is your daughter works in your department, you can't participate in any matter involving her, we will be like, you have to notify all relevant personnel that this can't come to you anymore. So it tends not to be in secondary employment, the same thing. You can't have this, you can have this outside employment, but you can't do anything involving that entity. Your boss has to be cool with that prohibition as well, and they need to be notified. So the advice is confidential, but it often requires, and even in the letter will say, these are the people that need to be looped in on it. So they often, it's not always just the person that knows.
And that's a good point. If I could just elaborate on that, as it goes for state employees that have those type of situations, the letters that go back to the employees that approve their secondary employment, it's copied to their supervisor or their agency, has to know. Also, the form that the employee completes to have that outside employment reviewed by our office has to be signed off on by their supervisor and their department head, because the State Ethics Commission wants to make sure that the agency supports this request as well. We don't want to be used as kind of a, oh, your boss said you can't do this, well, I'm just going to go to the Ethics Commission and see what they say. So there is that collaboration. And if it is something where there is a non-participation agreement that has to be entered into, where the employee is acknowledging I can't participate in matters where my qualifying relative's employer is involved, that is also we loop in the agency on that, because key staff has to be notified if they have to take over certain duties.
Great. Thank you all again.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for this. I want to thank the subcommittee chair for bringing this to our attention so that we can have these discussions. And so at the local level, I am on certain commissions for the city, and I have to fill out an ethics form, and then I have to do one here. They're the same form.
I know.
Can we please create some type of, like, I have it here, transfer over there, and there may be some slight differences, I understand, in the forms, but it's exhaustive, friend.
I think part of the issue is there are a few questions in there where it talks about, does your employer do business with the state? And the city's going to say, does your employer do business with the city? I get it. And it's, so what we've done at the state level for state boards and commissions, that financial disclosure is not nearly as extensive as the financial disclosure statement that I file as an employee or that you file as a legislator. Not all the local jurisdictions have made that same distinction. So I think that may be some of the challenges you're facing.
Yes. I mean, at some point, if I have to do it for locals and the state, I'm just wondering where can we get like a combined forces so it's one. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for a very enlightening and interesting conversation. Ms. Stanley, thank you for a recent meeting. You brought up something I had not heard before, and I wonder if you could go over it very briefly again about adult children. So children who are over the age of 18 but still considered dependent for tax purposes. When it comes to financial disclosure, do we have to go into their employment or anything else that we address for ourselves or our spouses?
So when you're doing your financial disclosure statement, there is a question that talks about your dependent child's employment. We do not care that your dependent child was a lifeguard at the community pool. You only have to disclose their employment if it is with an entity that is doing business with your agency, if there's, some connection to what you do here. So my financial disclosure statement, even though, even when my kids were dependents, I was not disclosing that they worked at the Maryland Renaissance Festival. So.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Great. I don't see any other questions. So just a PSA to make sure you make your appointment with Dia if you haven't done it yet. Thank you all very much for being with us, and thanks for the work that you do. I know it's not always the hottest, most exciting topic, but it's really important to the legislature and this committee. So we appreciate you being here. And colleagues, that was our last slate of briefers for the day. So have a great rest of your afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Just the time of the Environment Subcommittee organizational meeting will be 3:15. So we'll start in 10 minutes.
Any other subcommittee announcements? Nope.
you.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you.
I wanted to yell that in the.
I know.
Good day.